All right, welcome to another deep dive. And today we are heading, I guess you could say, way down south,
South of the border.
even further south than that. We're talking Argentina.
Argentina. Okay, interesting. What's going on down there?
So it's interesting you say that because Argentina, you don't always think about like the geopolitical landscape and all that.
Okay, right.
But there's this, wow, pretty wild article that crossed our desks.
Yeah.
And it's making some pretty bold claims. Basically, it's saying that Argentina's new government,
Yeah.
they're setting up this whole regional intelligence center.
Whoa, hold on. Intelligence Center. That sounds a little, I don't know, cloak and dagger for Argentina.
Yeah, and that's just it. So before we even get into the why, the who, all of that, let's just lay it out there.
Okay, yeah. Break it down.
So you've got President Milei,
Yeah.
right? Fresh face on the scene, and his security minister, Patricia Bulrrich, they're the ones pushing this whole thing. And their stated goal, to combat, supposedly, this whole, growing threat of synthetic drugs in the region. They're even going so far as call it an innovative approach.
Innovative. That's an interesting choice of words.
Yeah.
But okay, I mean, on the surface, who's going to argue with fighting drug trafficking, right?
Right, exactly. But here's where things get, well, a little more suspect. This announcement. It conveniently drops right after Argentina joins this U.S.-led coalition. And what's the coalition focused on? Surprise, surprise. Synthetic drug threats.
Okay, so a little bit of eyebrow-raising timing there. I see where this might be going.
Exactly, because the article we're diving into, they're not buying it. They're painting this whole thing as a power grab, plain and simple.
Interesting. So who are they saying is really pulling the strings here?
Well, they seem to think that this intelligence center, it's not just going to be a little Argentina thing. They're saying it could rope in all these other big players in South America, Brazil, Chile, even some whispers of European nations getting involved down the line.
Wow. Okay. So we're talking about a potentially huge network here. And they're suggesting this is all, what, at the behest of the U.S. to maintain their influence in the region.
You got it. And it gets even wilder. There's this U.S. official, a guy named Todd Robinson. We'll definitely circle back to him later. He's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But he actually came out and praised this whole plan.
Really?
Oh.
Okay. And what exactly did this Robinson guy say?
Well, get this. He basically said this whole intelligence center, it could put them ahead of the problem, whatever that means.
Cryptic. And just vague enough to make you wonder, right?
Totally. And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
The article, amidst all the, U.S. puppet masters and whatnot, their biggest gripe seems to be that Argentine officials are being super tight-lipped about the detail.
Okay, so what are they not saying? What kind of details are we missing here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, what's this center actually going to be doing? Who's calling the shots? What information are they sharing? Who are they sharing it with? It's all very hush-hush, which, as we know, can be a recipe for some, shall we say, less than savory activities.
Yeah, transparency is usually a good thing, especially when you're talking about intelligence gathering on this scale. So it sounds like we've got a good old-fashioned mystery on our hands. On the surface, fighting drug trafficking, totally legit. But something tells me there's something a little more, well, interesting going on beneath the surface.
Right, and that's what we're going to dig into. Interesting is putting it mildly. Right? I mean, this article does not mince words. Like, at one point, they even called Argentine officials cepellos, which...
Yeah, that's not exactly a term of endearment. Basically, imagine calling someone a sellout or a puppet, but with an extra layer of, like, historical baggage.
I was going to ask, for those of us who, didn't grow up in the thick of South American politics, what does that even mean?
Right, good point. It's not exactly everyday vocabulary, but it definitely carries a negative connotation. Like, they're saying these officials are serving a foreign power instead of their own people.
So reading between the lines, it sounds like they're basically accusing the Argentine government of being, well, puppets, with the U.S. pulling the strings.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And you can't ignore the timing, right? Argentina joins this U.S.-led coalition on synthetic drugs, and boom, suddenly they're setting up this big intelligence hub. It makes you wonder.
It makes you wonder a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this potentially shady intelligence center, whispers of puppet governments, and the whole thing feels like it's shrouded in secrecy. But before we, fully spiral into conspiracy theory mode, can we zoom out for a sec?
Absolutely. We always say context is key. And the current geopolitical landscape, it's a pretty important piece of this puzzle.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Give us the lay of the land.
Well, we're in the midst of this, growing rivalry between the U.S. and China. And increasingly, Latin America is becoming a key battleground in that struggle for influence.
All right, I remember reading something about that. China's been pouring money into investments in the region, building relationships. So maybe the U.S. is feeling a little threatened.
That's a good way to put it. And this intelligence center, if it really does expand its reach, like the article claims, it could be seen as a way for the U.S. to, reassert its dominance, project its power, potentially at the expense of China's growing presence there.
Wow. So this is way bigger than just drugs then, huh?
Yeah.
We're talking about global power dynamics, international rivalries, and poor Argentina is stuck right in the middle.
That's the reality of it. And it brings up a really important question that we should always be asking in situations like this. Who benefits most from this arrangement?
Good point. Because if it's all on the up and up, if this intelligence center is genuinely about, like, everyone coming together to fight synthetic drugs, well then, shouldn't everyone benefit from that cooperation?
In a perfect world, sure. But as we know, international relations, they rarely play out that neatly. The article we're looking at, they're pretty convinced that the U.S. is the one in the driver's seat here, the one who stands to gain the most. And frankly, that's not entirely out of line with the broader context we've been talking about.
Okay, so we're seeing a pattern here, but I gotta be honest, something's been bugging me this whole time. This whole synthetic drugs thing, can we just, like, back up for a sec? What are we even talking about here? And why are they suddenly public enemy number one enough to justify this whole intelligence apparatus?
That's a great question, and one that often gets overlooked in all the geopolitical maneuvering. So when we say synthetic drugs, we're talking about substances that, unlike, say, your cocaine or heroin, which come from plants, these are made in labs. Think chemicals, formulas, the whole shebang.
So less Pablo Escobar in the jungle, more like Walter White in his RV cooking up who knows what.
Exactly, and that difference in how they're made, that's key. It means they're cheaper to produce, easier to traffic. You can basically make them anywhere with the right ingredients. And often, they're a lot more potent than plant-based drugs.
Which is obviously, incredibly dangerous and probably even more appealing for the people making and selling this stuff. Supply and demand, right?
Always. And the other tricky thing with synthetic drugs is they're constantly evolving. New variations are popping up all the time, which makes it way harder for law enforcement to even keep track, let alone regulate. It's like a game of whack-a-mole, but way more dangerous.
So this intelligence center, if we're being generous, it's all about getting ahead of that curve, staying one step ahead of the bad guys.
That's what they want us to believe, yes. But the article we're looking at, they're not convinced. They seem to think there's a bigger game being played here, something beyond simply cracking down on drug trafficking.
And this might be a good time to bring back our friend Todd Robinson, because the article seems to think he's a pretty key player in all this, even calling his little endorsement of the intelligence center eyebrow-raising. What's the deal with this guy? Why is he such a big deal? Eyebrow-raising is an understatement, right? Just hearing this guy's official title, it's like straight out of a John le Carré novel.
Well, brace yourself. His actual title is Assistant Secretary of State for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs.
So basically, he's the U.S. government's, like, drug czar.
Yeah.
But on a global scale.
Okay.
But the article made it seem like this Robinson guy, he's not just some random bureaucrat, right? He's got history in the region.
No, he's got history, all right. We're talking decades of experience in Latin America. Venezuela, Guatemala, El Salvador, Bolivia, Colombia, the Dominican Republic. You name it, he's probably been stationed there.
Wow. He's like the Henry Kissinger of U.S. Latin American relations. But instead of shuttle diplomacy, it's all like drug enforcement and clandestine operations.
Something like that. But in all seriousness, that long history, it's exactly why his words carry so much weight. When this guy praises a new intelligence center, you can't help but wonder what's really going on behind the scenes. It all goes back to those bigger U.S. interests we were talking about.
Totally. It's like, is he really concerned about synthetic drugs flooding the streets of Buenos Aires? Or is he more worried about, keeping China's influence in check?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is this truly about tackling a global drug crisis, or is it just another move in this, geopolitical chess game? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Right. And this is where I start to feel like we need one of those giant conspiracy theory boards, with all the photos and the red string connecting everything, because we've got potential U.S. maneuvering, Argentina's role in all of this whole new wave of synthetic drugs. It's a lot to keep straight.
It's complicated, that's for sure. And it's important to remember, we're working with limited information here. This article, it raises some valid concerns, don't get me wrong, but it definitely has a particular point of view. We need to be aware of that.
So what you're saying is we shouldn't just take this article as gospel. even if it's a very compelling narrative.
Exactly. We always encourage critical thinking. Don't just accept what you read at face value, especially when it comes to, geopolitics and intelligence gathering.
Hmm.
Do your own research, look for different perspectives.
So for our listeners out there, what's the best way to get a more well-rounded view of all of this? Should we all be like brushing up on our Spanish and combing through Argentine news sites?
That's a great start. Looking at a variety of sources is key. What are other news outlets, both in Argentina and internationally, saying about this intelligence center? Are they raising similar concerns? Are there totally different takes out there?
Right, because even if this article is like on the right track, there could be other important details, other viewpoints that they're missing.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of just asking questions. What are Argentine officials saying specifically about this center? What about opposition groups? What about, human rights organizations? Are they raising any flags about potential privacy concerns?
It's all about getting that 360-degree view,
Yeah.
not just relying on one source, no matter how, compelling they might seem.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And the other thing to remember, this whole situation, it's fluid. What we know today could change tomorrow. So stay informed, stay curious, and keep asking those critical questions.
Words to live by. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up another deep dive. We covered a lot of ground here. Argentina, the U.S., China, the war on drugs, a little bit of espionage thrown in for good measure. And as always, we're left with more questions than answers. But hey, that's what keeps things interesting, right? So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.